The morning air in the prestigious Willow Creek Estates was not just cool. It was aggressively crisp, smelling faintly of clipped fescue and the immense, terrifying ambition of Veronica Thorne. Veronica stood on the Italianate portico of her home, Villa Vane, a name she'd overheard her rival, Bryce, use and privately adopted as a badge of honor, watching the slow, destructive arrival of the 60-ton hydraulic crane. The massive machine groaned, its tires crushing the pristine cobblestones of her circular drive, each crack a minor sacrifice to the altar of her social standing. This wasn't just a fountain. The Neptune's Vengeance was a 3-tiered, 12-foot structure of imported Carrara marble weighing almost 4,000 pounds. It was the centerpiece. It was the atomic bomb of landscape architecture that would win the eternal, silent war she waged against her next-door neighbor. Bryce Aldridge tonight was the Legacy Gala, the annual charity event for the Willow Creek Preservation Society, and this year it was at her house. The gala had historically been Bryce's territory. Last year, he'd debuted a hand-laid, heated travertine patio. This year, Veronica would drown that patio in the ostentatious, splashing glory of her fountain. Her entire reputation, the fragile scaffolding of her social hierarchy, rested on the flawless debut of Neptune's Vengeance. "You're on the azaleas, Gus. You are absolutely crushing the prize-winning azaleas." Veronica's voice, usually a polished, controlled mezzo-soprano, was now a shrill, strained wire. The crane operator, a man named Gus, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, specifically, anywhere without a woman yelling about azaleas from a $4 million house, leaned out of his cab. His face was weathered, his expression the kind of tired resignation that comes from 2 decades of managing colossal, dangerous machinery near fragile egos. "Lady, I gotta stabilize the outriggers. This thing weighs 30 ton without the load." "I need solid ground," Gus shouted back, his voice swallowed quickly by the early morning silence. "And for the record, your prize-winning azaleas are 3 feet of weeds to me right now." Veronica's jaw tightened. She took a pristine white glove from her pocket, pointed a finger encased in leather, and advanced toward the yellow Leviathan. "I don't care about your 30-ton or your outriggers. I care that the base of this fountain, the one that cost me $500,000, is aligned perfectly with the celestial North Point. And I will not have my sightlines ruined by a flattened perennial." This was the core of Veronica's reality. The world was an instrument designed to fulfill her perfect vision, and anyone who suggested otherwise was incompetent. Before Gus could formulate a suitable, weary reply, a smooth, deep voice cut through the tension. "Morning." "Ronnie." Veronica froze. She didn't even have to turn around. Bryce Aldridge was leaning against the decorative iron fence separating their properties, sipping coffee from a mug that was almost certainly artisanal and offensively expensive. He was dressed in tailored, impeccably casual gray slacks and a black cashmere sweater. He looked like he was about to sign a multi-million-dollar contract. "Not just watch a construction project. Bryce," Veronica greeted him, turning slowly, allowing her expression to morph into a mask of serene, bored distaste. "Did you not get enough drama watching my contractor haul away your sad little Japanese rock garden last week?" Bryce smiled, a slow, genuine, infuriatingly handsome smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, I wouldn't miss this. A crane this size hasn't been on Willow Creek since the time Mrs. Henderson tried to lower her entire indoor greenhouse into her basement. Remember that? The humidity sensor failed and she flooded 3 floors. He paused, taking a slow sip of coffee. "The point is, Ronnie, when you go big, the potential for catastrophic failure increases exponentially. I'm just here for the physics lesson." Veronica felt a familiar hot burn rising in her chest. This was the fuel of her existence. "There will be no failure, Bryce. This is engineered perfection, unlike your feng shui mishap." She gestured grandly at the massive wooden crate resting nearby, containing the fountain's primary basin. "Neptune's Vengeance is going to be a landmark. It's going to make your travertine look like a public sidewalk." Bryce tilted his head, acknowledging the hit. Bold talk for someone about to hoist 2 tons of brittle limestone over her glass conservatory. "Do you have full coverage on that, or is the deductible in the 6 figures?" I have a 7-figure insurance policy and a zero-tolerance policy for disasters, Veronica snapped. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to ensure the professional here doesn't drop an artisanal masterpiece. She spun back toward Gus, who had retreated into his cab, wisely choosing the relative safety of the heavy machinery over direct engagement. Gus was already hooking the enormous slings to the fountain's basin. The stakes were mounting with every link of chain. The next hour was a symphony of grinding metal, shouted measurements, and Veronica's increasingly frantic directives. The sun climbed higher, baking the tension into the air. Gus, focused and silent, began the main hoist. The primary basin rose slowly, painfully. It hung suspended in the pale morning light, a heavy white monument to vanity. Slow, slow. 1 centimeter to the left, Gus! Veronica yelled, pointing with the same white glove. She was so close to the center of the fountain's designated plot that her silk pants were dusted with freshly turned earth. Gus leaned out again, his face slick with sweat despite the cool air. Lady, I'm at max reach and min speed. Stop distracting me. This is a dangerous operation. It's dangerous because you're sloppy. She shot back, ignoring the very real threat of a 2-ton stone object swaying above them. Just shift it 1 degree. It's for the sightlines from the master bedroom balcony. Gus bit back a retort. He was already overloaded. He had an emergency job right after this, a small residential construction site a few blocks over. They had left a porta-potty in the street, and the city was threatening a huge fine. He'd told his dispatcher he could only make it if he could sling it onto the crane's secondary, smaller boom while he was still set up here and just run it over once the main fountain was down. It was a massive liability, but the dispatcher was desperate. The secondary line is live, then? Gus heard the voice of his spotter crackling through the radio. Gus muttered, Yeah, it's loaded. Just stay clear of the counterweight. I'm near the limit. What was that? Veronica demanded, stepping even closer to the base of the crane. She saw the heavy-duty hook hanging from the secondary line, waiting. Are you planning to lift something else while my statue is up? Are you double booking? It's nothing. It's a separate rig, lady. Stay back, Gus warned, his tone sharp. He was trying to execute the final, precise placement of the basin, while simultaneously managing the stability of the entire rig, knowing that the secondary load was now attached and acting as a dangerous counterweight at this extreme extension. Nothing? Everything on my property is my concern, Gus. Show me what's on that secondary line. I want to verify you aren't storing construction debris here before my guests arrive. Veronica was frantic, her perfectionism reaching a fever pitch. She had to control everything. The distraction, the sheer noise of her voice was exactly what Gus didn't need. His vision flickered from the basin to the ground. The outrigger pad on the front left, the one that had to partially crush the azaleas to get traction, slipped fractionally. The ground, softened by an unnoticed sprinkler leak from the night before, yielded under the immense pressure, causing the entire chassis to shift. Gus slammed the controls, trying to compensate. The main boom shuddered, but the basin was now perfectly nested on the pedestal, the final act accomplished. Veronica let out a triumphant gasp. See? Perfection. Now detach the slings. Gus didn't hear her. He was staring at the pressure gauge for the outrigger. The subtle tilt of the crane had put a crippling strain on the secondary hoist's cable. It was now pulling the entire crane platform into a dangerous instability. He had seconds before the crane was compromised. He had to lighten the load on the secondary line. He had to drop the secondary load. Dispatch, I'm in the red, Gus yelled into his mic, his heart hammering against his ribs. I'm dropping the auxiliary payload. I repeat, dropping the auxiliary payload. Veronica watched, perplexed, as the boom that held the main marble fountain remained stable, but the second, smaller hoist, the one she had been demanding he explain, whipped up and then began a rapid, uncontrolled descent, swinging wide over her meticulously manicured lawn. Bryce, who had been watching from the fence with an expression of mild amusement, suddenly dropped his artisanal coffee mug. The sound of the ceramic shattering was lost beneath the sudden, rushing wind. Veronica followed his gaze, shielding her eyes from the sun. The cable was moving too fast. The object was large, bulky, and square, and it was bright, offensively bright, in a shocking, clinical shade of industrial blue. It was a porta-potty, A standard plastic chemical blue portable toilet, emblazoned with the logo of Royal Flush Rentals, and Gus, in his desperate attempt to stabilize the multi-ton crane and save the $500,000 fountain, had just released it not in the designated street zone, but directly over the center of Veronica Thorne's lawn, 20 feet from the magnificent, triumphant Neptune's vengeance. The air smelled instantly, violently, of antiseptic chemicals and something far worse. The silence that followed the thud was far louder and more devastating than the crash. It was the silence of a catastrophic social implosion. Bryce Aldridge's raw, gut-deep laughter was the only thing that dared to puncture it, and it was a sound Veronica Thorne would forever associate with the smell of industrial blue sanitation fluid. Veronica did not move. She felt as if the sheer force of her own vanity had been weaponized and used against her. The Porta-Potty, a plastic monolith of public bodily functions, sat like a perverse, bright blue monument next to the majestic, if now overshadowed, Carrara marble basin of Neptune's vengeance. The contrast was physically sickening. Bryce finally managed to choke down his laughter, wiping a tear from the corner of his eye. "Oh, Ronnie, that's really quite avant-garde. Did you commission a statement piece on the futility of human ambition? Because that blue box is screaming conceptual art." Veronica snapped out of her paralyzed state. Her face, usually a study in flawless high-end skincare, was now a dangerous landscape of mottled red fury. She strode toward the fence, her shoes sinking slightly into the soft, overwatered lawn. "Shut up, Bryce! Shut up right now!" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "This is a construction accident. A lapse in professional judgment. It will be dealt with." "Oh, I know it's a construction accident," Bryce said, retrieving his broken mug pieces. He held up a shard of the ceramic like a prize. The physics were spectacular. A classic case of an auxiliary payload being jettisoned to save the main load under extreme lateral stress. Fascinating. And who caused the extreme lateral stress, Ronnie? Who was screaming about 1 degree and celestial north while the man was operating a 30-ton piece of equipment? "I was ensuring the integrity of my property." Veronica wheeled around, focusing her entire furious energy on Gus, who was slowly retracting the boom, his face grim. "Gus, get that atrocity off my property, now, before I call the police and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration." Gus leaned out of the cab, his weary look replaced by a granite shield of self-preservation. "Listen to me, lady. I am not moving this crane 1 more inch until I secure the rest of the fountain pieces and collect payment for the contracted work. That porta-potty was dropped in an emergency maneuver. You were distracting me while I was at max extension and near maximum load. You compromised the safety zone. My spotter and the recording from the cab will confirm that I made a distress call and dropped the lightest auxiliary load to prevent the entire rig from tipping over and crushing your conservatory or you." He pointed a thick, calloused finger at her. "You want to file a liability claim? You go right ahead, but that blue box is staying put until my rig is safely packed and I have a signed release. If I try to pick that thing up now, the whole rig is unstable. I saved your fountain. You're lucky that's all that landed." Veronica felt the blood drain from her face. She was trapped. Gus had leverage, and worse, he had a logical defense. The towering, silent presence of the crane confirmed his threat. She couldn't risk the fountain now, not when the most expensive piece was finally set. The Legacy Gala was in 12 hours. She retreated to her portico, pulling out her phone and dialing her architect. "Reginald! Reginald, get over here now, emergency! No! I don't care if you're in a client meeting. This is a Category 5 social disaster." Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "The crane. It dropped a porta-potty on my lawn. Reginald, a man whose entire career was built on maintaining Veronica's fragile illusion of perfection, arrived 30 minutes later, screeching his Italian sports car to a halt. He surveyed the scene, the exquisite white marble, the garish blue plastic, Bryce Aldridge still sipping coffee at the fence line and filming with his phone, and his pale face went whiter. Veronica. What in God's name? Reginald looked genuinely faint. "Don't ask. Focus. It needs to disappear. Discreetly. Gus won't move his crane until he's done, and I can't let him leave it there, or the whole neighborhood will see it." You need a hazardous waste team, Veronica. This is not just a plastic box. It's a containment vessel. You can't just roll it away. If it tips, if it leaks... Reginald didn't finish the sentence, but the implication, the smell, the stain, the biohazard was enough to make Veronica gag. I'll pay 10 times the hazard fee. Call a company. Now. They won't come without paperwork, permits, and a 4-hour window, and they won't use a winch on it. The structure is flimsy. They'll have to pump it first, then lift it. We don't have time. The society's caterers are arriving in 2 hours. Reginald wrung his hands, a nervous tick. Veronica paced the perfect lines of her drive. The sun was getting hotter. The porta-potty sat silently brewing its foulness. There has to be another way. We can't move it sideways. It has to go up. It has to go. Somewhere else. She stopped, her eyes fixed on the dense, untamed patch of wild woodland that bordered the back edge of her property, a section she'd always intended to clear but hadn't yet touched. It was a steep, overgrown embankment leading down to a dry creek bed, hidden from the road, hidden from Bryce's estate. The woods, she murmured, a terrible, desperate blueprint forming in her mind. The embankment, Reginald looked at her as if she'd proposed arson. Veronica, no. That's a 100-foot drop and it's steep. If we push it, it'll break. We'll be spraying. We'll be spraying contamination into the watershed. We are not pushing it, Reginald. We are lifting it 5 feet off the ground and carrying it using men, not machinery. We will drop it into the most overgrown, least accessible part of the gully, and we will pray to whatever wicked god delivered this thing that the overgrowth contains it until tomorrow morning. Tonight my lawn is clean. Reginald was horrified, but he knew how to manage her crises. He made 2 frantic calls. The first was to a reliable, silent landscaping crew he used for off-the-books projects. The second was to a heavy-duty vinyl tarp supplier, demanding a custom, weighted green tarp the color of deep forest moss. 45 minutes later, a beat-up pickup truck pulled up to the service entrance. 2 men, Manny and Jorge, emerged, looking utterly miserable. They were promised $5,000 in cash for 2 hours of work. They took one look at the blue box and the Carrara fountain, and then at the steep, weed-choked gully behind the house. Manny looked at Reginald, his eyes wide. "5 mil for this? You want us to hand-carry that thing?" He wrinkled his nose. "We're not hazmat. We cut hedges. 5,000 and double your hourly rate for the rest of the year." "This is a one-time discretion fee," Veronica interjected, stepping forward, radiating icy confidence and holding a thick wad of $100 bills. "You move it, you secure it in the gully, you cover it, and you never speak of the blue box. Do we have an agreement?" Manny looked at the cash, then at Jorge, who simply shrugged, defeated by the absurd sum. "We'll need ropes and gloves, thick ones, and we're not responsible if it cracks." "Agreed. Just make it disappear," Veronica commanded. The next hour was surreal. As Gus finally packed up the massive crane and drove away, leaving a gaping wound in the cobblestone driveway and a pristine, if still dry, marble fountain, Manny and Jorge began the grim task. They secured ropes around the porta-potty's base and top. The stench, even with them working quickly, was overpowering. Just as they were about to hoist it for the short, terrifying walk to the back lawn, Bryce appeared again, this time with a telescope perched on a tripod near the fence. "Just making sure I get a good view of the celestial alignment." "Ronnie!" he called out, his voice dripping with mock sincerity. "It's remarkable how the ancient Greeks managed to create such a powerful symbol of water only for it to be utterly eclipsed by a symbol of human byproduct. Very deep." Veronica ignored him, her focus entirely on Manny and Jorge. They struggled, their faces strained, hoisting the porta-potty slightly off the ground. They took the first difficult steps across the lawn. The portable toilet swayed, and the unholy contents within sloshed with a disturbing, heavy rhythm. They reached the edge of the lawn, where the perfect grass gave way to the wild, tangled forest floor. Slowly, laboriously, they lowered it down the embankment. It was a controlled descent, the men inching backward, guiding the box with thick ropes through the underbrush. Finally, with a sound of ripping vegetation and a muffled thump, the porta-potty settled deep in the gully, hidden from sight. sealed by the canopy in the steep terrain. Manny and Jorge quickly unfurled the massive dark green tarp and covered the entire structure, anchoring it with heavy stones. They climbed back up, sweaty, stinking, and immediately richer. Veronica paid them, and they fled in their truck, not looking back. Veronica stood on the edge of the embankment looking down into the darkness. It was gone. The lawn was clear. She could hear the caterers' trucks arriving in the distance. The gala would proceed. Perfection was restored, bought at a morally and environmentally compromised price. She smiled, a thin, triumphant curve of her lips. She had won the first round, but as she turned to greet the arriving caterers, she failed to notice a small detail. The porta-potty, when it had bounced upon landing, had kicked something loose. The plastic lid on the small, hidden rear waste port, designed for professional pumping access, had cracked, a hairline fracture barely visible under the thick green tarp. And now, deep in the gully, slowly but surely, a thick slow. The Legacy Gala was, by all outward appearances, flawless. It was a shimmering mirage built on a foundation of panic and foul-smelling secrets. Crystal glasses clinked like delicate bells. The string quartet played Vivaldi with meticulous precision, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of competitive socializing. Veronica Thorne, dressed in a custom, shimmering emerald gown that cost more than most cars, navigated the crowd with a smile that felt chiseled from ice. Every conversation was a performance, every gesture an assurance that the world, and certainly her world, was utterly perfect. The spotlight, she ensured, was focused squarely on Neptune's vengeance. Now fully assembled, the 12-foot fountain stood dry, waiting for its grand activation later in the evening, the climax of the whole event. But underneath the emerald silk and the perfect smile, a cold, oily dread churned in Veronica's stomach. She kept glancing toward the back embankment, half expecting the heavy green tarp to spontaneously combust, or the earth to split open and reveal the unholy blue secret beneath. The memory of the thud, the smell, and Bryce's unrestrained laughter played on an endless loop in her mind. "Veronica, darling, the gardens are simply divine this year," cooed Eleanor Vance. The elderly matriarch of the society, her eyes, however, darting toward the massive new marble centerpiece. "It's quite substantial. Very European. One almost forgets about the incident this morning." Veronica laughed, a silvery, high society sound devoid of warmth. "Oh, that! Just a minor mishap with the landscaping crew's temporary staging. An absolute mountain out of a molehill, Eleanor. You know how contractors are." "Indeed," Eleanor murmured, but her eyes, sharp with years of social combat, narrowed. "I thought I heard the most peculiar screeching sound, followed by a truly magnificent burst of foul language. And I could have sworn I saw Bryce filming something quite vigorously over his fence." "Bryce is always filming something," Veronica dismissed, waving a manicured hand. "He's still trying to get that viral video of his koi pond synchronized to Wagner. He requires attention. Now come, let me introduce you to the new head of the Preservation Committee, a position I'm so excited to be taking over next term." The blatant political maneuvering was meant to be a distraction, but it only focused her attention on the true source of her stress. As if summoned by her fear, Bryce Aldridge arrived. He didn't make a grand entrance. He simply materialized at the edge of the terrace, dressed in a sharp, dark suit that seemed designed to absorb light and attention. He moved through the crowd with an easy, genuine grace that Veronica could only mimic, trading light pleasantries, never looking directly at her, yet managing to be the magnetic center of every conversation near him. Veronica watched him accept a glass of champagne, his posture impeccable. He paused near the new fountain, running a finger lightly over the cold marble, a small, knowing smirk playing on his lips. Finally, their eyes met across the teeming expanse of the party. Bryce raised his glass to her in a silent, mocking toast. It was an invitation to battle. She broke away from her guests and approached him, her voice lowered to a razor's edge. "Enjoying the perfection, Bryce?" "Oh, thoroughly," he replied, his voice soft, almost intimate, making her skin crawl. "Especially the earthy undertones. Your choice of fertilizer this season is very Bold! Veronica's heart thumped hard against her ribs. She was certain she hadn't detected any unusual smells since the men left. I'm not sure what you're referring to. Everything here is pristine, is it? Bryce leaned in closer, and the intimacy of the action was deeply unsettling. About 20 minutes ago, my prize-winning hybrid tea roses, the ones right near the border of your rustic woodland, started displaying a stunning, entirely new shade of teal near the roots. It's an organic chemical reaction, I presume, or perhaps a daring new color palette for the Legacy Gala? Veronica felt a sudden, ice-cold rush of understanding. The leak. It had reached the water table, and the contaminated water was seeping into his shallow topsoil. You're imagining things. Bryce, you've had too much champagne, or perhaps too little attention this week, she scoffed, trying to maintain her bravado. I'm not imagining this, he said, his smile vanishing, replaced by a glacial seriousness. He subtly pulled his phone from his inner jacket pocket and angled the screen toward her, carefully shielding it from the nearby waitstaff. The screen displayed a high-resolution, perfectly framed photograph. It wasn't the Porta-Potty on her lawn. It was an image taken with a telephoto lens from the second floor of his home, focused on the gully. It showed the edge of the dark green tarp, slightly displaced, and underneath it, a small, glistening pool of electric blue fluid that was slowly sinking into the damp soil. The angle was perfect. The lighting was unforgiving. It confirmed everything. I have 47 other photos, Ronnie, Bryce whispered, his eyes locked onto hers. From the arrival of the blue box, to the two very tired men struggling with the ropes, to the moment they illegally dumped it on a protected embankment. I have the name of the crane company. I assume they're covered in the liability insurance, and I also have the phone number for the Department of Environmental Quality. They get very upset about large volumes of biohazardous, chemically treated waste entering the local watershed, especially the watershed that feeds into the famous Willow Creek. Veronica's composure finally fractured. Her voice dropped to a barely audible rasp. What do you want? Simple. I want justice for the azaleas, justice for my peace of mind and the pleasure of seeing you lose. The photographs are scheduled to be sent to the Willow Creek Times at exactly 10 p.m. tonight, mid-gala, with a full, detailed press release about the Thorn environmental catastrophe. Unless what? She demanded, the emerald fabric of her dress feeling like a straitjacket. You resign immediately from your position on the Preservation Society's board, publicly endorse me as the next chair, and issue a statement attributing the fountain's entire design to my long-standing influence and inspiration. You have 20 minutes. Bryce took a long, leisurely sip of his champagne. Welcome to the Legacy Gala, Ronnie. He walked away, leaving her standing alone, trembling with rage and terror. 9:45 p.m. Veronica had only minutes left before the social nuclear option was deployed. The gala was drawing to its peak. The guests gathered around the fountain. It was time for the grand reveal. The final desperate thought was that if the fountain worked, if the crowd cheered, she might be able to survive the scandal. She ascended the small, temporary stage near the fountain's base, took the microphone, and forced the most dazzling smile of her life. My dear friends, she announced, her voice echoing slightly off the marble. Welcome to Villa Vane. Tonight, we celebrate the enduring legacy of this wonderful community, a community dedicated to the highest standards of beauty and environmental stewardship. She couldn't believe she used the word environmental. She glanced at Bryce, who was leaning against a column, his arms crossed, checking the time on his watch. 9:55 p.m. And now, she continued, grabbing a decorative gold lever, I give you the centerpiece of this beautiful evening, a testament to classical beauty and engineering marvel, Neptune's Vengeance. She pulled the lever. The entire property's electrical system gave a brief, high-pitched whine as the massive pumps for the fountain's closed-loop system engaged. There was a moment of silence, a collective intake of breath from the assembled guests, waiting for the rush of crystal-clear water. But the water didn't rush. Instead, the marble structure began to vibrate violently. A low, guttural grinding sound, like gravel being dragged across metal, emanated from the base. The spout at the top sputtered once, twice, then ceased. The pressure built, trapped by the failure in the pipes. The pump, instead of drawing clean, circulating water was fighting a blockage, pulling heavily on the water that had pooled in the nearby catchment basin, water that was now being supplied by the slowly seeping groundwater. Then, with a sickening clog, the main water jets didn't shoot water. They violently expelled a thick, viscous cloud of foam. It wasn't white foam. It was a dense, sickly, electric blue foam, the exact unmistakable color of industrial sanitation fluid. It shot 15 feet into the air, driven by the intense pump pressure, then descended like a terrible toxic blue snowstorm, landing on Eleanor Vance's antique lace dress, staining the pristine white tablecloths, and settling in thick, bubbling patches on the marble basin of Neptune's vengeance. The smell followed immediately. A concentrated blast of heavily perfumed disinfectant, mixed with something unmistakably organic and stale. The guests recoiled in collective horror, gasping, stepping back, shielding their faces from the foul chemical spray. Veronica stood frozen on the stage, the blue foam dripping onto her emerald gown. The irony was a physical entity now. The vengeance was not Neptune's, but Karma's, delivered in a shockingly blue, foamy spectacle. The contamination she had tried to hide had entered the fountain's closed system, mixing with the water and, through the intense aeration of the pump, creating a public, undeniable manifestation of her desperate act. Bryce Aldridge looked at his watch. 10 p.m. He calmly put his phone away. There was no need to send the photos now. The spectacle was far more damaging than any picture could convey. He took one look at Veronica, the silence that descended upon Villa Vane was the sound of a dream dying. It was midnight, and the meticulously orchestrated perfection of the Legacy Gala had dissolved into a scene of toxic, blue-tinged wreckage. The air still held the acrid, cloying perfume mixed with the stale, unmistakable odor of sanitation waste. Champagne flutes lay scattered on the terrace, their delicate forms mocking the chaos. The marble of Neptune's vengeance was weeping, streaked with the solidified, electric blue foam that had erupted like a catastrophic omen. Veronica Thorne stood in the center of the devastation, her emerald gown now stained with the foul evidence of her folly. Her staff, having been paid exorbitant sums to clean the initial mess, had simply vanished, terrified by the spectacle and the lingering smell. Reginald, her architect and now chief crisis manager, was slumped over a patio table, hysterically trying to scrub a blue smear from his expensive trousers. The entire board left, Reginald whimpered, his voice high-pitched and broken. Eleanor Vance had to be escorted out by paramedics. She thought she was having a toxic shock reaction. They were all calling lawyers, Veronica. The papers, the Willow Creek Times, they were calling before the blue foam even hit the ground. "Silence, Reginald!" Veronica commanded, her voice no longer a shriek, but a low, dangerous growl. The humiliation had cauterized her fear, leaving behind a hard, crystalline core of pure, lethal fury. "Get the fire hose. Immediately. We need to wash the fountain, wash the terrace. Deny everything. We claim a rogue cleaning chemical was poured into the catchment by a disgruntled caterer." "It's too late," Reginald cried, throwing his hands up. "The scent. And the color. It's the signature blue of Porta-Potty fluid, Veronica. Everyone knows what that is. And look!" Reginald pointed toward the main gate. A large, official-looking black SUV, bearing the stark seal of the Department of Environmental Quality, DEQ, was idling silently at the end of her pristine driveway. Its harsh headlights cut through the elegant landscape lighting, creating deep, menacing shadows. "They're here," Veronica whispered, her bravado finally crumbling under the weight of state authority. "Bryce, that snake. He didn't even wait for the morning." A grim-faced woman in a dark uniform and rubber boots, Agent Hollis, strode up the drive, followed by a technician carrying field testing equipment. Agent Hollis showed Veronica her badge, a cold metallic symbol of the immediate, devastating consequences of her actions. "Ms. Thorne, we have received multiple citizen complaints regarding a significant chemical and biohazard contamination incident originating from this property," Agent Hollis stated, her voice flat and professional, devoid of judgment, which somehow made it worse. "We understand that a portable sanitation unit was illegally dumped on the embankment leading to the Willow Creek tributary." Veronica tried to rally. "This is outrageous." "It was a temporary storage unit for pool chemicals." "A misunderstanding. You have no authority to enter my—" "We have an emergency warrant, Miss Thorne," Agent Hollis interrupted, holding up a laminated document. "We also have photographic evidence of the disposal, witness statements, and, quite frankly, the smell is sufficient probable cause. Furthermore, we've taken groundwater samples from the property line of your neighbor, Mr. Aldridge, that show extremely high levels of formaldehyde and quaternary ammonium compounds, the active ingredients in sanitation fluid. Your fountain just sprayed an aerated sample of the contaminated groundwater across 100 guests. Ms. Thorne." The technician walked past Veronica and headed directly for the back embankment. "The immediate penalty for illegal dumping and contaminating a protected waterway is a minimum 5-figure fine. Ms. Thorne, and that's before we consider the mandated cleanup costs, which will require specialized hazmat crews and the complete excavation of the contaminated topsoil. And that's if we don't proceed with criminal negligence charges." Veronica stood motionless, feeling the cold, clinical reality of her disaster. It wasn't just a social misstep anymore. It was a felony. "I need to speak to Mr. Aldridge," she said, her voice shaking with a desperate urgency. "This is a neighborly dispute which has been escalated unnecessarily." Agent Hollis gave her a look of profound weariness. "The environmental violation is not a dispute, ma'am. It's a fact. But you are free to speak to your neighbor." Veronica didn't wait. She hiked her expensive gown up, dashed through the backyard, ignoring the sight of the technician, marking off the gully with bright yellow hazmat tape, and slammed open the decorative iron gate leading to Bryce's property. Bryce's estate was immaculate, bathed in a soft, welcoming glow. He was sitting on his travertine patio, the one she had mocked, a leather portfolio open on his lap, a single malt whiskey resting on the table beside him. He wasn't even watching her house. He was looking at a set of blueprints. He looked up as the gate rattled violently. His face was calm, his eyes alight with a deep, contained satisfaction. "Ronnie, a little late for a neighborly visit," Bryce said, his voice smooth and conversational, like velvet draped over a stone. "You called the DQ." "You ruined me!" Veronica screamed, stumbling onto his patio. Bryce sighed, closing the portfolio and resting his hands on it. "I warned you, Ronnie. I gave you a choice, social humiliation or environmental prosecution. You chose the latter by trying to murder my roses and pollute the creek. I'm an environmentalist, remember? I fund the local conservancy. I had a moral obligation." "Moral obligation?" "You're a sociopath, Bryce. This was about a fountain. A status game." "It was a status game," Bryce corrected, picking up his portfolio. "It became a matter of ecological disaster the second your landscape team dropped a Porta-Potty into the watershed. I wasn't going to compromise the whole community just to win a petty argument with you. This is beyond travertine now." He stood up, towering over her. "The DQ is not my problem, Ronnie. That's your problem. The cleanup, the fines, the inevitable lawsuits from Eleanor Vance when she learns what she inhaled, that's all yours? The board chair? It's mine now, uncontested. And the best part? I didn't even have to send the pictures." Veronica felt a strange lightness take over her body. The terror was gone, replaced by a cold, frightening clarity. She had lost everything. Her reputation, her position, her money, all would be tied up in litigation. She had played for high stakes and lost. "You've won, Bryce," she said, her voice eerily calm. She adjusted the emerald fabric of her ruined dress. "You have ruined my life and destroyed my entire standing in this community." "I've leveled the playing field, Ronnie." "You ruined yourself," he corrected gently. "No," she countered, stepping closer, her eyes glittering with a predatory light he had never seen before. "You may have won this round, but you haven't destroyed me. You just destroyed the old Veronica, the one who played by the rules of society." Bryce narrowed his eyes. "Don't be melodramatic. Go home and call your lawyer." "I can't do that, Bryce," she said, a wicked, chilling smile spreading across her face. You see, when I was checking on the fountain's pump house this morning, I realized something truly remarkable about its electrical system. It's on the same line as your subterranean heating system for the travertine. Your heated patio, the one you mocked me from all day, runs on a shared, unpermitted wire I put in 3 years ago. She paused, allowing the implication to settle. And I know exactly where the main cutoff is. It's buried near the gully. And I know how to make that cutoff not just turn off the power, but start a small, very contained, but very hot electrical fire. A fire that would melt the plastic cover and burn the evidence. Bryce's expression finally shifted, a flicker of genuine alarm replacing his smug confidence. You wouldn't. You'll be arrested. I'm already financially ruined and facing criminal charges for illegal dumping, Bryce. What is a little arson compared to environmental catastrophe? Besides, she leaned in, her breath smelling faintly of desperation and expensive wine. I don't want your house to burn down. I just want your perfect, smug, untouchable travertine patio, the one that started this whole rivalry, to look exactly like my lawn did this morning. Blue and ruined, she turned, leaving the gate swinging open. As she walked back toward the harsh yellow glare of the DQ tape, she pulled out a delicate diamond lighter from her clutch. Not for a cigarette, but for a task far more satisfying. She had nothing left to lose, and a woman with nothing left is the most dangerous kind of enemy. The scene faded on Veronica, walking toward the contaminated gully, the tiny flame of her lighter flickering in the darkness, a destructive pivot from defensive panic to calculated, ruinous vengeance.